And thank you again for joining us. We're really looking forward to this workshop, really. And with that, I will call this to order and turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Super excited to be here tonight and what I would call sort of the first of a series, we hope, of workshops that align with your strategic plan and some of the goals you've set. And the first one is going to be around economic development and your goals you've set there. It came after I actually had an opportunity to see Henry Fields at the Chamber's Economic Summit and then a follow-up meeting with the Lane Transit District Board where the information that was like broad and got narrower. And I thought this would be a really great opportunity for the council to hear about what's happening, hear from a workforce analyst and somebody that actually does this for work, tailor it to Eugene and your strat plan, and then also talk about all the other things we're doing. So it's a little bit of a different format, but I think one that'll help inform the work going forward this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Ann, and then are you going to turn it over straight to Henry Fields?
All right.
Thanks, Henry.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you to the city council and the mayor and the city manager as well. It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. So I am Henry Fields. I cover Lane and Douglas County as a workforce analyst with the Oregon Employment Department, which is a kind of unique role. Oregon has economists stationed throughout the state that help people get access to the economic data that they need. So really what I'm going to present tonight is a pretty large buffet of economic information. Maybe overwhelming, maybe you want more of a particular item. That is exactly what I'm here for. I help people get access to what they need. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the economic issues that we face in our area. Some things will be not news to you at all, and other things there might be a little bit more nuance to. But just know this is intended as an introductory effort to, if there's ever other information that can provide that would be useful, please reach out to me and I will help you get access to that. So, ready to go with PowerPoint here?
Oh, it's just behind you.
Okay, perfect. All right, excellent. All right. So I'm going to start by laying a little bit of the foundation, and then Ann is going to put a lot of color on what this looks like in terms of Eugene economic strategy and economic development in general. One of the main issues that our area is confronting is recovery from COVID, obviously. And this is a really important piece of background. So this shows the last two recessions in Oregon in terms of job loss month by month. So the yellow being the Great Recession and the light blue being COVID. So you can see totally different shapes to the two recessions. Great Recession was a very long, slow recovery, whereas COVID, we lost more jobs essentially overnight than we did in the entirety of the Great Recession, but relatively quick recovery. We're now over where we were before COVID as a state. But that is not the case in Lane. This is that same two recessions on the same scale. In Lane County, in terms of job loss, we lost more jobs on a percentage basis in both the last recessions. And here in Lane County, it depends what month you look at, but we're still not 100% recovered in terms of total number of jobs, which people obviously have a lot of questions about. And there's some information and nuance to put on that. But suffice to say, basically, Lane County got a little bit unlucky in the last two recessions in terms of the specific industries that were affected and the amount of jobs that were lost. We're still obviously significantly recovered from March and April of 2020. But not quite to that level. So this is the light blue are counties that have not recovered, that are recovering the slowest from COVID. It tends to be not just Lane County, but also some of Southern Oregon. Multnomah County specifically is struggling as well to regain all those total pandemic job losses, whereas many other areas of the state have fully recovered and are driving the state on a seasonally adjusted basis to have more jobs than before the recession. So this is my attempt to kind of show a little bit of what's going on at the surface. It's a little bit complicated. It's complicated by the fact that, for example, local education it depends when school is in session, when it shows up in a particular in a particular month. But I think this is a pretty good job showing us where the gaps are. So that black box is the total amount of jobs we are down September 2019 to September 2023, a relatively decent baseline of before and current, before COVID and now. And of those 1% were down, certain industries are above where they were in 2020. Things like professional and business services, financial activities, government absent local education, and manufacturing are doing better than they were pre-COVID in terms of total number of jobs. Whereas the largest gaps are in places like leisure and hospitality, which was obviously severely impacted in 2020. Local education, and then specifically private education and health services make up the largest part of the gap looking at this particular month. Unemployment is really the story that a lot of businesses are focused on right now, and a lot of people that are looking for jobs. And the story that is being told here is unemployment is very low, and in fact near record lows in Lane and Oregon. And what that means is businesses struggle to find the workers they need. And in general, it's easier for job seekers to find a job that they, if they're looking for one. The unemployment rate is the folks who are actively looking for a job and unable to find one. So when that number is low, you expect to see fewer people available for work on the sidelines, immediately available. So that being said, there are a lot of job openings that are vacant, and that is one of the reasons that we see for the tightness of the labor market. So the way to characterize this is Oregon job vacancies and whether they are difficult to fill or not. This comes from a survey that the Oregon Employment Department puts out every quarter, and you can see the off-the-charts levels in 2021 and 2022. Lots of jobs open all at the same time, competing for very few workers. They were not only more job openings, but they were more difficult to fill than the typical year before 2020. 2023, we've seen a decline. It's definitely a loosening of the labor market somewhat, but still very high relative to 2020 and before. And that's kind of how I would characterize where our labor market is right now. Not the fever pitch it was in the last couple of years, but still quite tight and quite difficult to find workers. So this is a really good kind of, I don't know, baseline heuristic for how to think about that information. And this shows the number of people that are unemployed versus the number of job openings there are at private companies. So you can see in winter 2013, there's 8-to-1 in Oregon, 8 unemployed people for each job vacancy. That's obviously a totally different hiring environment than it was in late 2019 when there's next to 1. And what's happened since COVID, you see it spiked up in mid 2020, as you might expect, as more people are laid off. It very quickly came down to not just the level it was before COVID, but even lower as there was so much hiring going on at the same time. So basically, the way you can think about it is if every unemployed person in the US accepted a private job opening, there would still be jobs left open. That's one of the main things that is determining a lot of the mechanics for what's going on in the labor market right now. One of the mechanics that is a result of that is that wages go up to try to attract more workers. So this, again, is just one way of looking at this very broad issue, but adjusted for inflation, these are real average hourly earnings across the economy, and a pretty conservative, like 12-month moving average, meaning looking over a good deal of time. You can see there's times when that number goes up, which means that even adjusting for inflation, people are taking more money home in their paychecks. And that happened, earlier in 2023. It happened very distinctly in 2020. During the time in between then, it went down a little bit, but that's not because wages weren't going up. That's because inflation was going up so high. So that's one of the things that I think a lot of businesses are facing right now, is trying to balance, how do I keep wages at the appropriate level to attract the workers that I need, while also, competing on cost basis. We've seen a leveling off. Those wages seem to not be going up as fast anymore, but also inflation is leveling off somewhat in kind of good news attached to that. This is one example of the type of data that I help people get access to. This is from publicly available sources, but I can really help people understand what's going on when they're looking for different types of workers, which one of my main customer groups is, for example, private businesses that are trying to grapple with a lot of these issues that we're talking about. All this chart really shows is that when people move from one job to another, they're getting more wages as a result. So I basically put this together as a result of a question from somebody saying, are people dropping out of our labor force because they don't want to work hard anymore? And I said, well, maybe you're losing people due to, the fact that they're earning higher wages when they switch jobs. And by and large, kind of across industries, that was the case. Across all sectors in Q2 of 2022, most recent data for this, we saw 17% wage gain moving from one job to another. Generally speaking, we weren't seeing things like people dropping out of the labor force entirely. When there's high demand for workers, they go where they can get higher wages in general. There are still plenty of people that stay in that same job, but that's one of those dynamics that is happening as people sort into, for example, a different career field or something like that. So I'm going to turn right now to some of the kind of structural issues, then we'll get into some more specifics about what's happening in Lane and specifically Eugene. But this is one that's really important to grapple with and think about, and it's something that I'm sure you all are aware of. But to put some perspective on it, this is the annual average wage per worker in private industry in the U.S. and Oregon and Lane. So Lane, you can see, is significantly less than Oregon, which is slightly less than the U.S. by this measure, which is not. There are multiple ways of looking at things like wages and income and stuff like this, but broadly speaking, kind of regardless of the data source you look at, you find something similar to this. Lane has significantly lower wages than Oregon does, and than the US does in general. And it's a big concern for our area, pretty obviously. People's next question is obviously, well, why is that the case? Can you give me the quick answer to that? There's not a quick answer. There's a lot of things that build up into that, some of which are not unique at all to Lane. But one thing I like to lead off with is this complicated chart. It does require some explanation, but there's some really important stuff here, which is, in my opinion, one of the biggest contributors to that wage gap comes from the different types of jobs that are available here rather than other places. So let me explain what's happening here. So this is on the y-axis, the percent wage difference of particular types of occupations from the US. So the ones that are below that line pay less than the US average in those type of sectors. Left to right is the percentage of relative employment concentration here. So further to the left means less likely to be concentrated here. So what you'll see is kind of clustering in some big sectors here. Those bottom left ones are ones that are less likely to be in a Lane County and less likely to pay as well as they are in the US. Whereas the upper right are ones that are more likely to be concentrated here and pay higher. And then you have some with different results. For example, management being essentially about as likely to be employed here, although paying less. So what you'll see is on this bottom left are a lot of careers like architecture, computer, legal, business, financial. These are sort of careers that in general are more likely to concentrate in larger cities. Because they have deeper labor markets and there's more, for example, cross-firm collaboration that is available. And there are some things there that are very difficult to see how Eugene itself could change a huge amount of that. That being said, it is an important thing to be aware of, and there are some ways to think about how to approach that problem at a city level scale. There are also on the top right some jobs that pay more and are more likely to be here. Things like, for example, on the far outside there is farming, fishing, and forestry. That's largely because our forestry careers in Lane County pay a lot more than farming and agriculture might in somewhere like the Midwest. But definitely you see things like healthcare and healthcare support as paying higher wages than their US average. And when you squish all these together, you get a large part of the picture of why there's a wage gap in Lane County. So you can probably see why it's a more complicated issue than just, oh, yes, we just need to pursue this, this, and this policy option. It's an important kind of table setting for what's happening with wages in our area. And it's not the entire story. But one way that local economic development professionals try to work on some of these issues is targeting high wage sectors, because some of those industries really have a concentration of those jobs that are either underrepresented or can be promoted here that are high wage. So I want to share this type of approach. Maybe is familiar to you, maybe is not. It is the sort of thing that Lane Workforce Partnership focuses on, our local workforce investment board. Many of the local economic development practitioners around the area are really good at kind of rowing this same boat, which is taking this diverse portfolio approach with a wide range of industries with each their own strengths. So, for example, things like the bioscience industry, tech industry, these are areas that are likely to be high growth. We have certain assets that we can build on, but aren't the largest industries in our area at this time. Things like construction and healthcare, growing relatively rapidly, a mature industry in our area, but can be cyclical as well. Whereas things like food and beverage and wood products build on centuries of economic specialization. There's a reason that those type of industries are here and can help really retain a skill set locally that is not represented in other areas. So the reason why I think this kind of approach is very useful is that each sector has its own potential application towards that future that we all want to see of a higher wage and higher growth set of jobs in our area. I bring up an example, not to pick on healthcare, which is, as you'll see on this chart, the largest of the sector strategy industries pays a higher than average wage, but just one indication why a diverse portfolio is very important. So many people thought healthcare was essentially recession-proof, and it had a difficult 2020, at least relative to previous recessions, where there was no job loss in 2008 in our area in healthcare, none in 2001, whereas overall jobs declined during those. That's not to say that it's particularly exposed. It's just important to have a diverse portfolio because industries like construction and manufacturing had a relatively strong 2020 in a lot of ways. Time here. So to turn this to where we're at in Eugene. So when I first started this role, I had a really, I went to school here. I had a lot of preconceptions about what Eugene was economically. So for example, in my mind stands out primarily as, a college town in a lot of ways. And my role has shown me a lot of ways that it's actually a much more diverse economy than I even gave it credit for. So for example, this chart shows in 2022, this is just Eugene UGB employment. What percentage is in what industry? You can see multiple base industries, things like healthcare, trade, transportation, utilities, manufacturing, and public education is down there at the bottom. Now, that's obviously a vital part of our economy, but that includes all the K-12 schools, that includes Lane employment, that includes U of O. All of those are lumped into public education. And so I think it's kind of interesting, for example, that even within UGB, there are more jobs in manufacturing than there are in public education, which is not something that I would have told you when I started this job. It's kind of an interesting economy. I think one of the arrows in our quiver is that we have a strongly diversified economy. If we zoom out to Lane County, Lane's employment looks a lot like the US with certain specialties that kind of build on those sector strategy things I was talking about. We have greater concentration in healthcare, private education and healthcare, which is fundamentally based on healthcare. Manufacturing, obviously public education is much more than the concentration in the US of public education jobs. But at the same time, we have less concentration in things like professional services, information, and other government employment outside of the education sector, which I thought was kind of interesting. So to put the final bow on what I wanted to say here before we have Anne talk a little bit more about economic development and open up for questions, there are a couple long-term structural things that I think are kind of important to understand. First is that we put out job projections for the 10-year horizon for all the industries. And some major highlights here in Lane County are that no major industry is projected to decline, which is not necessarily the case in all places in the United States. We have a kind of, again, diversified, broad-centered to our economy. And then one important thing to put in line here is that's the previous slide, the number of job openings expected in the next 10 years due to growth, lined up with the number expected due to replacement. So this is one of those kind of fundamental things that I like to bring people's attention to. Fully 80 to 90 to 95% of job openings in every industry are due to replacement in the next 10 years. That's not unique to our area. As our workforce ages, it's an important thing to be aware of. And also there's just natural churn in an industry, but it does really open up a lot of eyes when it comes to what type of opportunities are available for job seekers in any particular industry. I will say this information, and we could talk a little bit more about the other data tools that we have available and what I can help you get. This is by industry. There's also occupational data for nearly 800 occupations that don't focus on manufacturing, but instead on carpenters, how many projected openings are for that, or registered nurses, or highly technical fields that might be more useful for a particular application. Population growth is something that I know we've all thought a lot about in the last couple of years. One thing to be aware of is that Lane for a very long time is dependent on migration for its population growth. And generally speaking, this is a yearly average across the last couple of decades, how many people we add in Lane County year by year. So in the 1990s, for example, around 4,000 people each year. 3/4 of that due to net migration, people moving here minus the number who move away. Now, what's happened, there's two ways the population can grow, right? Net migration and natural increase. So the number of people born minus the number who die, which means that number has actually shifted negative in recent years, with a specifically pronounced negative in 2020 to 2022, as we might expect from COVID and unexpected deaths from COVID. But you can see the general trend absent COVID is less natural increase, and in fact, negative natural increase as of the 2010s, and still positive net migration to the point where 100% of our population growth comes from net migration, and that's not expected to change. Probably not going to see negative as large a negative natural decrease numbers in the next couple of years. But there's still a lot of net migration to our area, which is a real economic asset in a lot of ways, puts a lot of pressure on our area as well. But it's a very kind of, it has been for at least the last 40 years, an important kind of underlying economic asset fact about our workforce and how we grow and add new workers. There's housing construction data that kind of goes to show how that matches up with population growth in recent years. So this shows the residential units permitted by structure size in Lane County, with a yellow line for where Eugene is as a portion of that, somewhere usually between 50 and 70% in the year. And you can see in general, our rate of permitting new structures hasn't matched up with what we saw in the 1990s and 2000s. That being said, there's still, there's lots of questions about how that population is changing and the impact that that has. One impact is that obviously housing is very expensive in our area relative to other places, which kind of magnifies some of the wage questions we were talking about. And this chart just shows that housing costs have risen, particularly on the affordable end. So the light lines at the bottom are the bottom third of housing, and then the darker lines are median housing value in our area, both significantly higher than what they are in the US. Obviously, population supply and demand is one part of that, but there are other things that enter in as well. And the final structural thing I wanted to talk about is workforce diversity. This is another one that I think I wasn't really aware of when I first started this job, and it's interesting to kind of see what it looks like. Lake County's workforce is less racially diverse than the nation's, just as one example. And that's something that a lot of us know and see, but even though in 2022 our workforce is 82% non-Hispanic white, in the US it's something like 60%, it's actually kind of even more of a concern in our area to think about how our workforce is changing, paradoxically because of that reason. So the reason why is because we're building from a relatively non-diverse base in terms of our population, that workforce is changing very rapidly. So this is just over the last 20 years, the net change in workers by race and ethnicity. You can see, for example, Hispanic and Latino workers have more than doubled during the last 20 years, as well as Black or African-American workers, nearly the same for Asian workers as well, whereas non-Hispanic white workers are declining in absolute numbers. That being said, I think it's just important. I try to highlight this for example, business owners who are trying to think about how to expand their workforce in this time of worker shortages, and how to think critically about how to make sure that their workforce is set up for the growth that we're expecting to see in the future. So there are many other things that I'd love to get into about that. That's my initial entry into it. I want to hand it off to Anne so she can talk a little bit more about the specifics about what economic strategies are working on there, and then we'll get into some questions.
Can you hand me the microphone?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll scooch these out of the way. All right. Me. Well, I did it really great earlier. There we go. Did that take?
Not yet.
Okay, well, I can go ahead and
There we
start.
go.
I'm Ann Fifield. I'm the Economic Development Manager in the city's Community Development Division, and I'm here to give you a short summary of the work that the city does to support economic development. Given Henry and my last name, I was really tempted to talk about the agricultural industry, but I'm going to talk about Eugene and economic development. After I'm done talking, we're going to turn it over to you all for discussion. And so first I want to start with the basics. What is economic development? Its overarching goal is to improve the economic well-being for community members. An essential component of economic growth is growing jobs and income for members of the community. The Community Development Division is charged with economic development, but actually every part of the city and our partnering agencies contribute to the community's economic well-being. Basic urban services are essential components of economic development. Wastewater, water, the airport, energy, telecom, roads, and clearing roads after a huge ice storm. These are essential economic development. Business incentives are somewhat meaningless if our roads don't work or the toilets don't flush. I'm here tonight to focus on economic development programs and not all these other interesting things that the city does. So last year, you all approved a 5-year strategic plan that includes 3 strategic goals that focus on economic development: improve downtown, support local businesses, and work to increase wages and create jobs. I'm going to talk about the city's programs that support these 3 goals. Start with downtown. The first one on your list is improve downtown. Downtown is the commercial center of our region. It provides the physical space for a wide variety of office users. The pandemic has shifted how a lot of industries use commercial office space, but downtown continues to be a regional center for office uses. The downtown fiber network is an asset that has helped keep software companies and other businesses in downtown offices, but with a smaller footprint than what they had in 2019. 4J's recent decision to move its administrative staff to the former Wells Fargo building shows that centrally located office buildings continue to be an important to many different organizations. 4J is also going to add to downtown's vitality. It's expected to bring over 200 employees to that building.
Downtown is also the cultural center of the region. Our downtown offers a lot of cultural venues that provide the physical space for our thriving arts industry, but the venues play a huge role in attracting people to the downtown and the region. Eugene's rich arts and culture industry is a magnet to retain talent in the region, its impact extending well beyond downtown. The other important contributor to a vibrant downtown is, of course, housing. You just had a work session on housing and the challenges of getting new housing in the downtown, so I won't focus on it today. But I think it's important to remember that not only investing in programs to incentivize housing increases our housing supply, new housing in the downtown will greatly contribute to an economically successful downtown. So the second goal in the strategic plan on economic development is to improve support for local businesses and the business environment. I'm going to talk about 3 programs that focus on supporting Eugene-based businesses: our Enterprise Zone program, our Business Loan program, and our Business Liaison. The West Eugene Enterprise Zone program offers a 3-year property tax exemption on the value of new investment if that investment meets Eugene's eligibility criteria. It's one of 74 enterprise zones across Oregon. This map shows West Eugene. The green is the boundary of the Enterprise Zone program. Over the last 10 years, we've authorized 20 different exemptions that have led to about $183 million in investment, and those investments have created over 380 jobs. Recipients of our Enterprise Zone exemption include very recognizable businesses like Yogi Tea, which it's sold across the United States and Europe. The program has also served other very recognizable names, including Springfield Creamery, which sells Nancy's yogurt across the country. Recipients also include businesses that are less well-known to the general public, including Snow Temp, which operates large refrigerated warehouses that are a part of the cold chain used by our food and beverage industry to get refrigerated products to their markets. We've also helped out PackTech, who makes lids for 6-packs. Their handles are made out of 100% recycled plastic, and they are sold all across the country. The Enterprise Zone program has also supported the growth of Deployed Logics, a company that makes temporary shelters used by the military and emergency services across the globe. This is a picture from Costa Rica, I think. The next program I want to talk about is the city's business loan program. The city's offered business loans for over 40 years, providing gap financing to businesses across Eugene. Our business loans have supported businesses that produce well-known consumer goods. We've done a lot of work with our local food and beverage industry with loans to Ninkasi, Thinking Tree Spirits, Wildcraft Cider, just to name a few. We've also worked with other manufacturers, including Bike Friday and Pacific Recycling, a company that's more of a D manufacturer. They take apart and shred automobiles and other metal products and turn them into recyclable materials. They're an important link in our whole region's recycling system. Our loan program has also worked with high-tech and bioscience industries, including In Vivo Biosystems, a local startup that has commercialized research that was started at the University of Oregon. The third program that supports businesses isn't a program, but a person, and that is our Business Liaison. This is a relatively new staff position created to be the first point of contact for businesses. Eugene's Business Liaison is currently Michael Bradley. He's the guy on the right of this photo. The picture was taken at the new Downtown Asian Market. The Business Liaison works with businesses to understand their issues and then identifies which part of the city can help solve them. The liaison has worked with hundreds of businesses across Eugene. So the next goal, the third economic development goal in your strategic plan, is to increase wages and create jobs. As Henry pointed out, this is a big topic. A key path to increasing wages is to train people. We coordinate with agencies who provide the training, including LCC, Lane ESD, and the U of O. But we also provide direct support to a few key training programs. We use our federal community development block grant allocation, our CDBG funds, to fund micro enterprise training programs. We're currently supporting the business training program run by Plaza de Nuestra Comunidad. Their Cambios program is a micro enterprise training program. It's in Spanish and it's culturally appropriate for a largely immigrant community. We're also using our CDBG allocation to fund a childcare training program. The Small Business Development Center at LCC has initiated an accelerator course focused on individuals that provide in-home childcare. In 2023, we began a grant program for individuals who complete the training. So not only does that program support new businesses, these businesses are also providing a much needed service in the region. We also recently provided one-time funding to support an effort to create pathways into employment for folks living in our shelters across Eugene. Food for Lane County has modified its warehouse training program to work with sheltered individuals. And Viking Textile Maker Hub has established a training program for industrial sewing. The trainees learn skills that are needed by firms like Deployed Logics. One of the challenges in our region is low wages. And I've stolen one of Henry's slides to highlight our low average wage, just to remind you. One approach to address this problem is to focus on industries with high average wages. We've worked for many years to support and cultivate the tech sector, which has a high average wage, but the sector with real emerging potential is bioscience. It's a fairly small industry in Eugene right now, but it's been here for decades, built out of research from the U of O. Our local businesses include Abcam, Thermo Fisher, Dune Sciences, and Invivo. The new Knight campus has created an opportunity for the industry to really grow. Its fundamental purpose is to accelerate the commercialization of scientific research. The research and facilities at the Knight campus are growing commercial activity in Eugene as researchers are looking at creating new commercial ventures and existing companies are coming here and looking to partner with researchers. It's a long-term process. It takes years for the research to transfer to a commercially viable venture, but the seeds have been planted. The challenge for our community will be to retain these new commercial ventures. Some of the challenge is a lack of low-cost leasable lab space. The Knight campus does offer this, but it is already full. Eugene enjoys a really diverse mix of industry. We have the wood products industry and the heavy machinery that supports it. We have multiple bicycle manufacturers. We have bulk handling systems, which is a world leader in recycling equipment. And we have a non-toxic laundry detergent company. So many others doing so many interesting things. There is a lot to celebrate about our local economy. Eugene businesses lead the way in innovation, technology, environmental solutions. And so our team at the city is working to support their success. Over the next few years, the city is focused on a few key things. One is that we have limited land supply. We brought the Clear Lake area between the airport and Highway 99 into the urban growth boundary, but it still needs infrastructure. We're working to identify funding sources to get the area served so we have land available when our existing businesses need to expand so they can grow here. We're also working to improve downtown. It continues to be a commercial center, but it's fragile. We're working to keep it safe and clean so people want to be there and to increase housing and commercial activity. We're also working to increase the housing supply citywide across income levels. A challenge faced by businesses, we hear this over and over, is that their employees can't find housing that is affordable in Eugene. Housing is an economic development issue. We are also working to support the bioscience industry so that the Knight campus grows new businesses that want to stay here and can find the resources they need to thrive. And finally, the city as a whole is working to create a positive business climate. Our permitting team is focused on working to help projects move along. Business liaison is working to solve problems and show businesses that they're valued. The mayor has convened a blue ribbon panel to elicit feedback from the business community on how the city can better support it. So now I'll stop talking and we're going to hand it over to you all. Henry is a rare guest here, and so I will hopefully let him answer questions first, just because he's a wealth of a lot of knowledge. His expertise is really deep in this topic.
Thank you both so much. This was such an interesting presentation, and I've made a little list of my own questions, but I want to just tee this up a little bit for the council. We're going to do this a little bit differently from our normal work sessions, because I'm hoping to have an environment in which there's a little more back and forth and discussion. So think about how you do this in the budget committee, where you have an opening round where it's just quick questions and clarifications, you sort of immediate feedback, brief comments. And so we'll open it up that way. I won't keep a timer, but I am encouraging you to be brief because we really do want everyone to have a chance to be part of the conversation. And then we'll begin rounds, and the first round will be a 2-minute round, and then we'll go into 1-minute round. So hopefully that just creates a setting in which there's just a lot more back and forth. So with that, I'm going to open up this first round, and we'll just do it in ward order. So I'm going to put Emily up first and then be followed by Matt.
Thank you. I'll pass. I don't have any questions right now.
Okay, Matt?
I thought we were gonna go in reverse alphabetical order. Thank you so much. Neither of you came up for a breath. Both of you honed in on the slide about the average wages in Lane County. I'm curious about the average wage in Eugene, if that tracks with our county data.
Yeah, I have to look into the most recent numbers to make sure I'm not misrepresenting it, but I do think that Eugene wages will be a little bit higher than Lane County. The rural areas tend to bring it down a little bit, but you see the same sort of fundamental relationship, but that gap would be slightly smaller in Eugene. There's a couple higher wage employers here.
I was fascinated by seeing the construction sector as well. So one could submit that we have a healthy economy when there are cranes in the air, when we're building. What I didn't see, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, is the Coos Bay project, the potential for a shipping port out of Coos Bay may provide real opportunity for Eugene, whether as a federally designated land port, but the shipping of goods and services via rail in particular, and having a port between San Francisco and Portland would arguably reduce carbon footprint, less trucks driving, and it would drive down the cost as well. I didn't necessarily, it didn't jump out at me, so forgive me if it's there, but is that kind of shipping sector, or is the movement of goods and services something that, and you talked about bioscience being on the rise, and the innovation and research that's birthed at the university as being on the horizon. But I'm also curious about the potential for rail and for shipping of goods and services. And finally, I'm keenly interested if either of you had a magic wand. You talked about the policy pieces that this council has adopted, and you had a magic wand. What would be your kind of innovative economic wish that you would see come true?
Well, to start with the transportation question, Anne might have a little bit more perspective on this. I don't know a lot about the logistical advantages of, for example, what I will say is there are a lot of products that are, you can think about it in terms of our competitive advantage, our economic specialization is a lot of products that do need to move around. So there's a reason, for example, that wood products and food and beverage are a real critical element of what we do here, including some of the companies that Anne was talking about as well, machinery. So, without knowing exactly what the impact of that would be, certainly the case is that our area punches above its weight when it comes to those types of industries, and being able to access more markets would be an important outcome. I think, waving a magic wand is always difficult. Like you may notice from a lot of my presentations, I give a lot of context, it's more complicated than it seems. It's very hard to say, here's the solution. I do think a lot of what Eugene is focused on has been really excellent in terms of, again, that diverse portfolio and supporting businesses at all different levels. I do think that there's building on the structural advantages that we have to help develop a more diverse portfolio of those type of jobs that aren't as present here is something that I don't know exactly what you do about that problem, but to me, that's one of the main things that helps explain some of that gap. How do we make it so it is more feasible for folks to work remotely here, have their legal or management career without having to live in a San Francisco or a Seattle or a Portland? Not saying that I know the answer to that, but I do think targeting that kind of outcome is a really important element in that.
I think if I could wave a magic wand, I'd have infrastructure in place in a variety of parts of town. I wish infrastructure weren't so darn expensive.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Thanks, great presentation, both of you. There's literally hundreds of millions of dollars coming to Oregon through the Biden administration's bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Hundreds of millions. And in terms of grants and incentives for energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate change activities, as well as other things. And those have a real potential to create a large number of family wage jobs. And, but it's not going to just find its way here. We have to go get it. So it's very ripe for the picking, but only if we're organized and if we're aggressive in going after it. So the question I have is, what are we doing to capture our fair share or more, preferably, of this once in a lifetime opportunity to go after this money? It's in the very near term, you know, the next 2 years.
The biggest challenge that we're facing, that those investments are facing, are what everybody's facing, and that is the lack of large industrial land. We've had folks nose around, mostly local folks interested. I talked to folks interested in battery storage, solar production, cell manufacturing, so energy production using solar as well, and battery production as well. And we have limited place to put folks. And so we don't put a lot of effort into going after and trying to draw people here, because the worst thing that would happen is then they get all excited and there's no place to put them. And so their challenge is the same challenge that all the industries face here.
I want to add on too, I think that you're exactly right in terms of thinking about this as an opportunity to set up to think about the structural elements of. So for example, when I share information about how each industry is projected to grow, that's at the very gross level, right? What's happening in manufacturing and construction. But there are ways to look at independent jobs. So for example, solar installers, as well as a more general type of career that touches on that sort of work. And I think the way that a place like Eugene ought to think about it is think about those areas that are slated to be high growth because of one-time federal investment, and how are we orienting local resources in a way that can capture as much of that as possible, or help promote that be an opportunity here. So for example, there are tools on our website to look at things like individual occupations like solar installers, and seeing where we project we could be and what we ought to do to get in line for that, I think is a really important goal.
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm not real fond of recruitment of large companies. I think that's usually a failed strategy, but the amount of money available for installers of heat pumps, of solar, of batteries, of doing weatherization, which are all really well-paying jobs, family wage jobs, is just tremendous. But it doesn't seem like we're positioning ourselves to take advantage of that as much as we possibly could. I guess that's the conundrum for me, which is here's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we're might miss it if we're not organized and aggressive at going after it.
I think that's good feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you. Forgot my number for a minute there. Realized I was next. So I really appreciate that. There's a lot of information to like download. It'd be nice if we had like a day to sleep on this, but I'm really glad that we scheduled this. I wouldn't say this is my area of expertise, so I might ask dumb questions. So you talked about focusing. I really like how we're supporting local businesses, right? The people that are already here doing work, how can we help them do better, right? That makes a lot of sense to me. And you said, we're kind of we're focusing on tech and bioscience, these industries that already pay well, probably higher educated folks who demand more because of that education. And that makes sense to me too. But I'm wondering, I mean, those jobs already pay more, right? Are there things that we can do to I mean, we don't have a magic wand, right? We can't make people pay more, right? For these jobs that are paying like not living wages, right? Or very like on the edge. Are there things that the city can do? Or, I mean, and the answer can be no. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. But I'm wondering what you think about that.
That's a really excellent question. That it is more complicated. We can't just say, so for example, one key example, Anne brought up things like childcare, right? Childcare is obviously a critical
element of supporting our local economy. Childcare workers, generally speaking, earn very low wages because of structural issues with the childcare sector, right? There are exceptions to that, and there's great local work to be done to upgrade that. Folks like Holly Marconti at Onward are doing a really good job trying their best to work on a structure that helps move that forward. That being said, I think there's kind of a multi-pronged approach to that. That's the right question to be asking. I don't know that we know all the solutions, but definitely things like employer education, working together to upskill local workforce so that people are providing all the skills that they can, and just creating an infrastructure where those jobs are, I mean, at the very least, socially valued, economically valued in the way that they should be. That's a more speculative approach, but all those elements kind of together are, because you are exactly right? There's the high wage jobs that fit within there that are already high wage, and there's upskilling and upgrading the work that is currently being done, and that's part of the gap as well. So I think it's kind of an everything all at once approach, but some of those things that you talked about are exactly, I think, a pretty critical element of that.
And I'll just add in, if you mandate a higher wage, you may mandate the job to
Right.
go away. And it's just a tough balance that it's a policy issue that everyone faces everywhere.
Yeah, okay. So my other question, I was really, that the program that you talked about that you're working with, and I'm gonna probably butcher their name, but Plaza de Nuestra Comunidad.
Uh-huh.
That's fantastic. That
Mhm.
seems amazing. And so I'm wondering, I know that there's a local organization recently that works with the Black community. I don't know if, are we working with other communities in the same kind of way to support them in a culturally appropriate and accessible way?
The one that's through Nuestra is they're Plaza de Nuestra. The new name, they were Huerto de la Familia. That they're a relatively new recipient of those funds. We were using those micro enterprise funds through Dev Northwest, and then there's CDBG funds. There's a needle that has to be thread there to make sure it works. And it took a while to get it so that Huerto was able to use the funds. And the new organization that is supporting Black-owned businesses, whose name I am forgetting.
They changed it, so I can't remember.
It's the
Black culture.
The Black culture.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
She has just started up, and we have begun. We've been talking with her. She sits on the mayor's blue ribbon panel. I think we're very interested in partnering with her in the future. She's got a business accelerator, I believe, and we're definitely interested in partnering with her to move that forward. I think that Black-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses, they just face challenges that other businesses don't face, and I don't know what those challenges are. And so it makes a lot of sense for us to partner with organizations who walk the walk and work with them.
Yeah, I think your slide about how our community is diversifying, like, I think we all know it is, but seeing those numbers, they're large, right? They're and it's encouraging, but as that, I think, your point was that as that is happening, then we need to be ready to support those folks in ways that make sense for them, right? So great, thank you so much. This has been really interesting.
Hey, thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, thank you both for your presentations. Very informative. Really appreciate that. One of the things that struck me was your presentation about, or the portion where you talked about we're likely to undergo a bit of a change in the next few years, in that the greater proportion of the increase in our population changing from births and deaths netting out to in-migration as a much larger percentage. Can you give us further in detail about what you expect and why?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of this is building on other people's.
And this is Portland State, probably.
Yes, Portland State is the folks that put together the population estimates. I will say, so I think what is important to emphasize about that is our population growth has been dependent on migration for quite a while. There was basically, we have now switched to 100% of our population growth is due to net migration. Without taking us too far down that rabbit hole, a lot of people have questions about, like, well, where are folks moving from? How long are they staying for? Is this a permanent thing? And I would say, broadly speaking, across the board, our economy has I don't want to say it's been dependent on, but it's really grown used to the fact that we attract people from most places of the US, in not just Oregon, but Lane County specifically. It's a place where people like to move to, and that doesn't seem likely to change. There have been a lot of discussions, obviously, in the statewide level about, oh, we had negative population growth estimated in the last year. A lot of that is due to changes in Portland. But even with that estimate, Oregon is likely to be a place where folks are likely to want to move to. So I want to set that aside because that has been the case for many, many years and seems to be likely to be continuing the case. So basically what I would say is we are likely to continue to attract people from the outside because we have for a long time. Even if that reduces somewhat, I still think that there's a really important element of our workforce and economy that is based on the fact that more people move here than move away. And so I would say like lower end estimates are that we'll be at that reduced level, but simply to look at the last couple of decades and say year over year, we usually add between 3,000 and 4,000 people each year is a pretty strong indicator of essentially where we'll be in the future. That could change somewhat, but our workforce really benefits from that in a lot of ways yeah.
Knowing that fact.
Yeah.
How can we leverage that for greater economic success in the future?
Yeah, so I think the real key element is making sure. So the reason why I think it's an asset in a lot of instances is because when new people move here, they bring their ideas for a business, they bring their skills to the workforce. Even if they're coming here to retire, they bring their demand for local goods and services. So really thinking about how to leverage that in population growth to start their business here, to be able to integrate their skills into the workforce that, you know, is short of workers. So that does take some infrastructural planning that we're pretty good at as a region because we have done that for a long time. But being more explicit and thoughtful about how to bring in this changing workforce or bring in a workforce that you know is coming from other places, I think is a really big asset in what we do, a really big asset for our economy.
And I'll toss in housing supply.
Yeah.
I actually was going to leverage that into another question specifically for you, Anne, but go ahead, please.
Well, I'm done.
Okay. So it strikes me that the University of Oregon and everything that's gotten built across Franklin is the creation of an opportunity, a lab that's, you know, and essentially funded in order to see greater success. My questions, are we partnering with them in the best way possible? Is there more we could be doing to assist in the kind of economic development that grows out of that science park? And then secondly, does our new membership in the Big Ten provide an opportunity? I suspect we're going to see quite a lot of new students as a result. I would predict large scale student population growth over time. But if we were trying to leverage that to help best feed the whole community economically, any suggestions?
We do partner a lot with the university. I spend a lot of time talking with folks that are associated with industry relationships at the university. I think we can do more. I think they're starting to turn a little bit more out and work with the community. Over the weekend, I was just thinking there's a federal document that's if you want to be eligible for EDA grant funding, you have to have this regional document pulled together. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the U of O, they had better be at the table on making that document because they've actually been very successful on getting EDA grants. They've been partnering with OSU on very like technical things that like working on things like don't really understand what they're doing because it's very scientific-y stuff. And it's benefiting all of us. They're partnering a lot more with OSU. And so there's an opportunity for more regional partnership on that I do think that the pandemic sort of gave us Zoom meetings have really changed how we relate with each other.
Yeah.
And I had an experience working with regional partners in the pandemic that I totally built better relationships with people across the region because we didn't have to figure out where we were going to meet this time. And so I think the university has really played into that. And so we're working on it, but I think there's more we can and should be doing because I think the night campus is a gift to this community. It was a huge gift that was to the university, but this community will really benefit
Right.
from
I
it.
agree.
And I think being in the Big Ten, there will be an impact. I think our name, the hotel, all the hospitality industry is going to see an impact. And it's a bigger name that when I first came to Eugene in 1994,
Right.
I kind of had to tell people who the Ducks were. And everybody knows who the
Try
Ducks are.
83.
Yeah, yeah. And so I do think it's makes it a more, it's a recognizable brand, and that really matters. We have a surprisingly recognizable brand, and I do think Nike is a huge part of that. People know where Eugene is because of Nike.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think this is a really good presentation, and I have some specific questions around healthcare. I've been having conversations with my healthcare providers and other folks for a while now, and one of the things that is a disturbing trend is the fact that we train nurses here, LCC, and through other schools that are training other medical professionals, and we're losing those professionals to other communities. They're going to Seattle, they're going down to California, they're going to places where they're getting, one, better wages, two, and this thing is the thing that's really kind of disturbing me is the fact that they're getting better benefits in other places than they are here. That we have had some of our quote unquote Oregon or local healthcare providers that have been excuse me for my my rather uncourteous metaphor. They've been cannibalized by national organizations who have sought fit to reduce the benefits, the healthcare benefits that healthcare workers get. So my question is, we've lost basically our major healthcare presence in Eugene recently. Everything's over across the freeway in Springfield. We do have a few things that are being reorganized now. I know the mayor and Representative Nathanson and others are working on that in the legislature. But I think that the problems that we're facing are more core to the industry and the fact that we're losing doctors, we're losing nurses, and we're losing other medical professionals because, the industry in the area is not providing the same level of benefits and pay that they're getting in other communities. Can you speak to that?
It's an excellent observation. I will say, underscore a couple of things you're talking about. There has been tremendous upheaval, obviously, in the healthcare industry. And one way that comes out, so for example, I showed that there's a gap relative to employment pre-COVID. A lot of that is at places like, for example, nursing care facilities that can't afford to pay a higher wage for a registered nurse or a CNA than other places can. So again, not to latch on your metaphor, but even to the extent that somebody's eating somebody else's lunch, it's happening even within this community. It happens very often. That being said, I think that there's a lot of, you bring up a lot of good pipeline questions, who's trained locally and who is able to stay here. You bring up a lot of questions about competing with various areas. And I do try to provide as much data as I can on where we have advantages and where we have disadvantages. So we do pay higher than average healthcare wages, but that includes the entire United States, and where our graduates might end up is a more particular question than that. So I try to help businesses be as well informed as they can about that. And when it comes to the benefits question, that's another element on top of it, not to mention things like work culture, burnout just overall across the field. These are all things that kind of need to be brought to that conversation. So again, don't have the answer for you. I think that's a keen observation in a lot of different formats there.
I'll toss in, we train a lot of people. We export educated people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should be doing a lot more to retain graduates from the university. from Bushnell, from LCC, so that this is a place for them to land. And that's particularly a concern with Knight campus is the last thing I want to see is those new commercial ventures getting exported down to California. And it's all of those things like making sure just that general, the ecosystem in which we live, make sure we've got adequate housing for them, keep the quality of life in this town good. You may get paid more in Seattle, but you will face a terrible commute.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay?
Thank you, Mayor, and fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. My question is whether, you touched on this a little bit about the opportunity that Zoom has given us for further connections, but where in these metrics, and maybe it's just not significant at all, can we see remote work? And how many workers do we know are working outside of in companies outside of our city, or people who are working out living outside of our city and remote working?
Such a good question. We just had a long conversation.
Yeah. So broad strokes, I think, obviously work from home has grown tremendously. We know in the general US, it's grown about 3 times. It seems to be permanent number of workers from home is about 3 times what it was. It used to be about 7%, now is somewhere in the 18 to 20-ish%. And Eugene is not exceptionally high or low in that. As Anne pointed out, we have some assets that might push us in a little bit further direction. Although the window of, what are we all going to do about this? What is this Zoom thing? That window is closing. Now we're moving more into the permanent kind of how are we going to take advantage of this? And what I will say on that is, if you'll remember early in the pandemic, there was kind of a Chicken Little scenario and oh, this is the best thing ever scenario, right? There's everybody can work for a San Francisco company and live in Eugene and earn San Francisco wages. That didn't materialize, but at the same time, not everybody's working out of a camper van in a national forest, right? So we're somewhere in the middle here, and I think there is still some room to move around. And but I think Eugene has a couple of really large assets to build on. And I think that's another kind of key strategy to this wage question, to this quality of life question. What makes it so that somebody wants to, what's the value proposition for an area like Eugene where you can earn higher wages somewhere else, but you don't have to live somewhere else. You can live in a community that is quite nice in a lot of different respects. Making that value proposition and then creating the infrastructure that helps make that possible. So we don't know all the answers, but that's kind of the broad strokes of where folks are at remote work wise.
And I'll touch on the tech sector was particularly impacted. And our tech sector we have a really strong software industry in this community, but when they pay lower wages than they do in Seattle and San Jose. And then suddenly in 2020, our local employers, their biggest problem was they were losing their staff to other folks who could pay more. And I think there's been so much churning in the industry. I think it is still kind of settling out how that looks, because those big paying firms in the Bay Area have sort of decided, well, if you want you're going to we'll pay you wages appropriate to where you're living. And a lot of them have also said, you're coming back into the office. And so I think it is still evolving, and it'll be a while to see where it lands.
Excellent. Yeah, 18 to 20% is quite high. And, we see infrastructure here in our city to accommodate some of that co-working spaces and other things. I think it'd be an interesting conversation to continue looking at how our job sector will change and grow, and how we can, better position ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Henry and Ann, for the presentation. I thought they were it's really relevant information. I wish I had more time to just kind of digest what I heard, but we don't. So moving along, I'd like to start with the Knight campus. I took a tour about a year ago over there and was very impressed with what they had. But I found it very interesting when we got down to the labs. They started talking about all the internships that they were acquiring to send students to, and they were all up in the Portland area. And I asked specifically about West Eugene and our biotech firms out there that have some of the same needs and have the same challenges with employment and recruitment and retention. They weren't aware. I started rattling off names and they weren't aware of any of them. I mean, they knew Thermo Fisher and they knew some of the big ones, but there's also many medium-sized ones out there. They have the same needs that could benefit from this and could also in turn benefit the U of O and the students that go there. So I was remiss in not following up with city staff, but that might be something that we approach them with a list of some of these biotech companies like Invo Biotech Systems, that does a lot of work. They did a lot of work around COVID. I won't spend time getting into the details of what the companies do, but that just struck me. If we're trying to attract and retain talent, I think it starts with trying to expose them to what's here and available. The second thing, I have a very good friend who owns a business here in town that they employ a number of engineers. And he was talking about the challenge of recruiting and retaining engineers, where if an engineer's down in, let's say, the Bay Area, and a certain employment doesn't work out, they can walk across the street and apply at 3 others without, going more than about a block. That's not the case here. When he hires an engineer, they have to relocate here. And if it doesn't work out, they have to exfil from our community and find somewhere else to go, which makes it a disincentive when we're trying to attract that. One of the things my friend and colleague, Councilor Evans, and I found in working in West Eugene, trying to attract the solar manufacturing industry, is they like to locate in pods. They like to come in groups, even with the competition, because then they bring their own supply chains with them and they can stabilize those needs. So, I mean, that's something that's interesting. And actually, to get at what Alan was saying, yeah, the big fish are hard to land, but we had big companies wanted to locate here. They couldn't find the land. They need a minimum of 100 acres to build something, but they were going to employ like 1,000 people with living wage jobs. So I do think it's worth trying to figure out how to make this all work. And I understand we've got plans in the future, but also to quote Alan, we're missing our opportunities right now to capture some of these investments. And then I actually had a question too about manufacturing. I was noticing that we have about 9% of our workforce is in manufacturing. And I know we've lost a lot of manufacturing over the years here, watching it myself. How does that shake up with a similarly sized community somewhere else? Is 9% low?
That's a good question. So it's actually more than the US. Eugene and Lane County have a higher percentage of manufacturing jobs than the US, slightly more, but in that same range. Specifically, for example, the wood products industry has become a lot less labor intensive over time. And that is certainly the case. Like you can see that over time, it takes fewer people to turn a log into lumber than it used to. But at the same time, one advantage that Lane County has and Eugene has in its manufacturing sector is, again, kind of a diverse portfolio even within manufacturing. So, for example, 2020 was very kind to food and beverage manufacturers because more people were taking our high-end products that are produced here and making food in their house, for example. Whereas wood products actually had a decent 2020 as well, but has had some cuts in the last year, for example. There's always some differences going on here, and things like how supply chain is affected in each industry kind of makes them operate a little bit independently of each other. So it's good that Eugene has a couple of different bases to build on. But yeah, broadly speaking, we have more, again, as a percentage of our economy than your typical area our size.
Okay, and then another question, in your work, I'm sure you see other regions, even though you're dedicated to Lane and Douglas County. What I described in the solar manufacturing field, is that something that's common in other industries where they like to co-locate like that?
Absolutely. That's an excellent observation, because that's the benefit of co-locating. That's why we see a lot of clustering of jobs in big cities, right? That's what makes a dense labor market from both the supply and demand side. And I'm trying not to sound too much like an economist egghead here, but really it is about, like, yes, can the worker go find somewhere else to be if it doesn't work out? Can the employer find 2 or 3 candidates for a job position for every one position they have open? So there is a little bit of chicken and egg here that puts a smaller metro at a disadvantage, no question. But being kind of cognizant of our role in that and helping businesses see cooperation as mutually beneficial rather than, stealing because I could pay a quarter more. I think that's the way manufacturing used to operate. I find a lot of manufacturers today very much view it more the way you're talking about, of like, I mean, yeah, we didn't get the candidate, but we all need engineers. It's great that they can live here. It's great that we have some way to attract folks who are spouses of people that come here for U of O. Like those kind of strategies that kind of get at a portfolio, I think are more and more in favor. Yeah.
I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee sometime. I've got a million questions. But I know we have time limits.
And the sector strategy work
Yeah.
addresses that
Yeah.
issue. I think we had real success with the tech sector. They all,
Yep.
every firm had their own thing going on and they saw each other as competitors. And with the sector strategy work, they were all brought together, and when the Technology Association of Oregon was a huge player to make them see how they had shared needs. And so by working together, they started talking to the university about what kind of skills the students were coming out of the university with to support the sector. And so you have to kind of clear the air and get people to see that there's those opportunities. And so I think in that sector, we did it really well. We, the pandemic has definitely thrown some things off to the side. Getting that chicken and egg, the Knight campus is a big egg. And so you'll want to keep building chickens to roost on, maybe
Nicely said.
But it is so hard to start from scratch, but we've been given this gift. And so that is something we just really don't want to miss, that opportunity. With manufacturing, we have this incredibly diverse manufacturing sector. I think if we just talk about it as a wood product sector, we're not going to get very far. We have to talk about it as advanced manufacturing. Everybody has technological needs. Everybody has software needs. Everybody has skilled machinist needs. If we can get them to think about them as a shared sector with some overlap needs on skilled workers, on supply chain issues, I think we're more likely to see a positive outcome. I think there's a mindset of that's my competitor, not my friend, when actually, no, that company in Salt Lake City is your competitor.
Thank you very much for your responses. And I agree with Councilor Keating that we need to put our shoulder into helping that port get built in Coos Bay.
Okay, I'm gonna open it up for folks to have a second round, but I actually am gonna step into the queue here for a minute with a couple of questions. They're a little, maybe more specific. We had a report in council in the end of December from the Arts and Business Alliance about the impact of arts. And I don't know where to see this in all these, where do they show up? Because they're clearly locally quite important. So maybe you could answer that. And then the other question I have is around the difficult to fill jobs, and how are you defining difficult? Is that a mismatch with the workforce, or is that a skill set? Or is that they need land? What's difficult? So those are my two questions.
I'll talk about the culture. I knew that you had just had that big report on the economic impact of the culture industry, so I didn't talk about that. And it's that I think one of the huge benefits of our arts and culture is that it makes this place a very nice place to live. You can go see whatever you want to see in a mid-sized town. And I think that there's the other piece of all of the jobs and the impacts that the jobs are having. But I think from my work, I think that's just a really important part. It's like our park system. It's one reason I want to be here.
Yeah, that's
difficult to film.
No, well, yeah, and just one more thing about the arts there. That particular research item is a great example of our data doesn't speak to that as fully as it could. Art shows up in all sorts of different places, whereas that group put a lot of work into talking about what happens when somebody spends $1 here from outside. So anyway, that's just basically a value add on top of whatever I can say, which is arts is concentrated in our area. We do have a higher percentage, and that spills into even arts tangentially related industries, things like software development that was talked about. Those are cultural and economic assets that we're building upon. When it comes to difficult to fill, that is from a survey that we send out, and it's employer decided what that means, difficult to fill, which is subjective, but we track it over time to see, okay, it was 50% in 2019, and now it's 67%. We also ask them why it's difficult to fill. The number one reason in the last couple of years has been lack of applicants, meaning zero or too few people applied. But we have more fine-grained analysis, and people will even tell us things like, I can't afford to pay a wage that we need to. So there is more fine-grained analysis that is available. What I will say with broad strokes is the number 1 and 2 reason is always lack of applicants and lack of qualified applicants, meaning they don't have the training that they need to. So that's the labor market is still the dominant issue in recent years. But there are other things as well, things like location. We can't compete with other industries that I could share, drug tests, any number of things that might come up as a reason why this is a difficult job to fill that we could share more data on.
It just is sort of a follow-up, but this has come up with everybody else's questions also. Is the sort of question of, is the workforce we have the workforce we need, right? And so is that a factor? And this is important that the net migration is important because actually we don't have the workers we need, or is this a bigger question for us in terms of how do we build that pipeline where we're actually giving people the training we need for the jobs that we're building or wanting to build?
Let me answer it this way. So we have an asset in the fact that we have net migration. There are places in New England, the Midwest, that have a net out migration, that have people that are leaving pretty consistently, that don't have the luxury of asking the question that way. But at the same time, we also have a very diversified and skilled workforce that we need to take full advantage of. So it's definitely both of those things. But we still adjust strategy on either section of that, how to upskill current workers or make sure that folks that with a particular skill set are able to move here and live here.
I'd guess that the baby boom generation retiring has created part of that gap.
Yeah.
You have people with
Right.
40 years of experience under their belt. Some industries like that, it just takes time to build the skills. And you've got a new generation coming up, but they're young and they just don't by definition. And so I think we'll be in that will drive some of that. And I think the migration can help resolve that. And we do regionally, there's a lot of conversations to ensure that training programs at LCC are meeting employers' needs. And there's new employers come here, existing employers run into problems. We work really hard to connect those two.
All right, okay. Are there counselors who want to, so we have a few more minutes, so there's time for second round. Yes, Matt, and then Alan.
Yeah, thanks.
And these are 2-minute rounds.
Thanks. I have a few questions based on the conversation that's been floating around, but I'm keenly interested in the number of persons who might be working multiple jobs to make ends meet in a community that's so great to live in which wages are low, but the cost of living's high. For example, I work in state government, a campaign strategist, a baseball announcer, I'm a Eugene City Councilor, and I happen to carry an OLCC
You're messing
servers,
up all of our data.
a server's permit. You need me to sling drinks. Yeah, I'm totally skewing the data. How do we stack up with communities that are our size, or how do we stack up across the country in that?
Ooh, I'll have to follow up with specific data. I think we have more multiple job holders here, but it's not a terribly high. I know the total percentage is somewhere around 5% of people hold multiple jobs in terms of multiple wage jobs. But if that's significantly higher in Eugene, I'm not aware of it, but it is an important element in our.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Well, all but one of our counselors happen to have
Okay.
multiple jobs. There are 3,000 to 4,000 persons moving to Eugene decade by decade. I wonder if there are trends decade by decade about the cohort, the age of the cohort that are moving here.
Mhm.
Is it a retired cohort that we're attracting, or is it a younger millennial cohort? Where are workers coming?
Mhm.
Clearly, folks across the border are having fewer kids.
Yeah.
Are folks coming here to retire? Are folks coming here to start a family?
Both, and probably the only net out migration age category is early, college graduate age, just because of a lot of folks move here for school, and naturally you're going to have some net out migration there. But it is more diverse than we are just a retirement community or people only move here for work. Complicated by the fact that younger people are just more likely to move in general. But how I would answer that question broadly is, yeah, it's kind of across the spectrum. That has changed somewhat over time. And again, we could chase down some specific numbers to kind of talk about that. But as of recent years, yeah, it's been pretty across the board, not one thing or the other.
Ballpark back of the napkin math, it's my understanding around 50% of UO graduates will leave the community. It's around 80% of Lane graduates will stay. Does that track with national trends?
I don't know how that would line up there exactly. And also I'm not U of O has its own view on the data about its own graduates, for example. I don't know what their numbers look like, but I think I would say, let me say it this way. The number of bachelor educated 25 to 34-year-olds is lower in Lane County than it is in the US overall. That tells me something about our ability to attract and retain. It's not the end all be all number, but we have a less educated young adult population than you might expect for being a college town.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And finally, to pick up what Councilor Groves was saying on the moving and pods pieces, can we attract a couple hospitals to co-locate?
It would certainly make a lot of those staffing issues a lot better. Although I know plenty of folks that, came here to be part of Peace Health and have moved into other healthcare jobs in the industry locally that they would not have been aware of had they not moved here for that. But that's more kind of anecdotal, how somebody comes to this area. But that kind of experience is also not that rare. Somebody comes here for U of O, their spouse finds a job, and that's what they stay here for. That kind of thing can happen, which is an asset in our portfolio as well.
Great. Thank you, Team Fields.
Alan?
You gonna field another question? So we talked a little bit about our competitive disadvantages. What are our competitive advantages? The things that we should exploit or promote when people choose to create a job, come to create a business or create jobs or go look for jobs. What are they looking for? What do they see here that they don't see in other places that we should be focusing in on?
Well, two things. One is building on what I was just saying about us being an attractive place. I'm not sure how many folks here were born in Lane County or even born in Oregon. In Oregon, it's less than 50% of folks were born in Oregon. And that's a kind of a unique asset that we can build on of folks liking to coming here for an exposure and then finding out what they really like about living here. The other thing to be aware of that I think is maybe an underutilized asset is the depth of our workforce because of the type of work that's been done here for so long. So even down to and including folks like approach to general hobbies and life. And I mean, gardening here is a way of life in a way that it is not in other communities. And that has a lot of impacts in terms of the type of skills that people bring to their workforce. Wood products being another one. People know more about wood and forestry here, just kind of walking around and breathing in the air than they do in other places. And things like that are, I think they actually do show up in the workforce. There's a reason why we have a depth of, software developers and creative folks and independent thinkers and people that work in wood products and can do a very specific skill set that has lots of different applications. Those are the type of things that don't always show up in economic data, except to say that, wow, it's kind of strange that so many people can do this type of skill in a city our size. So I think leaning into that is a little bit more nebulous concept, but I think it's an important thing to think about, like the strength and depth of the workforce in that way.
Yeah, from where I sit as a city councilor, what are the things that we have control over? We don't have control over the workforce, and I agree that's part of our advantage. But things like, what about things like culture and the arts? The fact that we're a mid-sized city that seems well organized, we have a great natural environment, we have great parks and open space.
Yeah,
those seem to be our competitive advantages. A lot of times when I go away, like I was just in Washington, D.C., came back and went, because of a whole bunch of factors. But how do we exploit those, promote them so that we can tell people about our competitive advantage?
I think on any of the materials we produce to provide information about potential employers, anything to attract talent, we lead with quality of life. We absolutely do. There's always a picture of a guy fishing in a river. And that's, it is, our rich cultural offerings for a mid-sized town. I think I think there's a lot of advantage. I mean, I have chosen to live here. It's a lovely place to live for a lot of reasons. I think the size of this town has advantages over a big megalopolis in that there's less economic segregation, self-segregation. There's part of Eugene that is kind of like Lake Oswego, but it's like 2 or 3 blocks. And in Portland, it's a whole town. And so all of those kids go to school together. But in Eugene, they're mixed up with the folks from Gresham. They're cheek to jowl in Eugene because it's smaller and it's more socioeconomically integrated. And I think that that's an advantage. Compared to other places, our school system, I have in a conversation with folks who work at the university talking about how can we talk about our school system. I was at a point where I was not feeling good about it with this class size. And this person said, if you lived in Atlanta, you wouldn't send your kid to the public schools. You'd be paying for a private school. That you can get a good education without paying for it here is a huge advantage. And I thought that's absolutely right. We have our size. I feel like we're a little bit of a Goldilocks town. We have so many things a big city offers, but you should not go to the grocery store in really rundown clothes, because you will run into somebody that you know
Right.
professionally.
Believe me, I know that one.
Yeah, I'll bet you do.
Yeah.
Less is more.
And I don't fail to mention the park system that we have here, which is
Fantastic.
great open space and all those kind of.
All of our recruitment materials, those marketing materials to inform people about the resources that are here, they are covered with beautiful pictures of how great it is to live here.
And people in pajama pants.
We leave those out.
Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. Enjoying this conversation. In your travels or exploration, are you seeing, with more people staying home and working from home, are you seeing, residential growth that's different, meaning like live work space where the structures are going in are wired differently to have a home office, maybe a dedicated home office space?
I don't know enough to say about the infrastructure side of things. It does seem, I wouldn't call it, this massive de-urbanization. There is a little bit more of a kind of decentralized urban growth pattern in a lot of cities. I don't think Eugene is particularly affected by that just because of the city that we are, but there is kind of, I think, some still unresolved questions about, how to make downtown a center of gravity, that type of thing. But in terms of infrastructure, I'm not sure I can say much about the specifics there, work from home.
I think most of the data I've seen has, what I know about Eugene is consistent with national information. People are staying in their larger homes. They're choosing to not downsize because that extra bedroom makes a really great office. And we're seeing that here as well, along with the people not wanting to move because of interest rates and all of that. But I don't think it's particularly different here than other places.
Well, I'm wondering, is there something we should be looking at that's starting to approach housing differently, that we could maybe jump a couple iterations by following trendsetters? I mean, we don't produce housing, but we certainly create policy that can push or pull in a certain direction. Well, think about that.
Yeah.
You know where to find me.
Okay, thank you. Any other
Cancun.
Any other questions for, I just, as you were talking, one of the things that kept emerging when the first couple of years I was in office, I was served on the board for RAIN, for the Regional Accelerator. And the language that RAIN used always was an ecosystem, was that sort of business ecosystem. And it feels to me that what you've presented to us is a little bit of a sense of what that ecosystem actually looks like and what those, but at some point that would be a great kind of relational piece to see in a presentation in terms of thinking about Eugene and what is the ecosystem. This might even come out of our Blue Urban panel, thinking about it. What does that ecosystem actually look like, and where are we a little weak, or we're draining it dry, or so.
Every so often, someone will say, we need to map out all of these economic development resources, and they always get bogged down.
Yeah.
And one reason is it's constantly shifting and
Yeah.
evolving. And I think that's actually a strength of the interagency partnerships that we all have, that we're working together. Sometimes I talk to LCC a ton, and sometimes I talk to the U of O a ton, and it just kind of goes in waves.
Right.
As needs change, the labor market churns, and
But maybe at the higher level, maybe not so much in the weeds where you can't keep up with the updates.
I'll tell you, I can't.
Couple steps
So
out.
many people have tried. It's
Right.
almost comical. It sits on it like it ends up, it never gets done.
Right. Okay. Well, that's aspirational then.
Yes, just to map our ecosystem.
All right. If there are no other questions or comments, I think we thank you so very much. It was such a great presentation and so informative, and I really feel better educated. So thank you for all of that. And with that, we are adjourned.